Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner, heading west through West Yorkshire on the M62. A lane is still blocked off on the exit slip road approaching the Chain Bar roundabout, junction 26, south of Bradford at the scene of a collision. That queue tailing nearly back to the Tingley turn off junction 28, and the A46 Lincoln bypass remains closed north of the Highcombe roundabout at the scene of an accident. On the Surrey stretch of the M25, the inside lanes closed clockwise 11 to 12 after a lorry caught fire north of the M3. Recovery works taking place, taking about an hour and a half to get through. On the western stretch further round, the inside lane shut clockwise just north of the M40 following an accident. West London, the A315 Isleworth, that's still closed for an ongoing investigation. And on public transport, cancellations on South Western Alton to Aldershot because of the safety checks. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
We're making this summer funner, with 3 incredible prizes to be won. First, a fantastic £15,000 in tax-free cash that you can spend on anything you like. Next, there's the latest iPhone 15 with a brand new set of Apple AirPods. And finally, £500 to spend at the UK attraction of your choice. The summer fun could be on us. For another chance to win the iPhone, treats and £15,000 cash, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB06 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 28th of June. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Patrick Christies. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
As time passes,
she could have said Stump. You made my argument for me.
My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
Went everywhere.
Something practical could be done.
Or I can become something different.
Patrick Christies tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's election channel.
And when the big stories break, we're tackling them on Britain's newsroom. When we disagree, and we disagree a lot, it's even livelier than normal.
We don't disagree that much.
We do.
His comedy, though, is revolting. I knew her, and unlike you.
That explains Beverly Turner's temperament.
It's a bit frosty in here, isn't it?
You'll have one of me one day.
Yeah, for dartball practice.
Britain's newsroom on GB News. Weekdays, 9:30 a.m.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening and welcome to Vote 2024, The People Decide, with me, Camilla Tominey. Another jam-packed show lined up for you tonight. We're going to be discussing whether health MOTs for the elderly will solve A&E waiting times. We're going to be discussing that with an NHS expert. And should we stop going to the pub for work socials so that Muslim colleagues aren't excluded? That's what one law firm has called for. We'll be discussing that. All to come on Vote 2024, The People Decide. We'll also talk to Mr. Pothole himself on Labour's plans to fill in our bumpy roads. Don't forget to get your views in by visiting our website gbnews.com/your say. But first, here's the news with Polly Middlehurst. Camilla, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, the top story from the GB Newsroom is that Rishi Sunak insists he hasn't given up hope of winning the UK election, but he has warned voters not to give Labour a blank cheque. The Prime Minister was campaigning at a school in North East Lincolnshire this afternoon as new figures emerged showing the economy recorded no growth in April. That's something of a setback after his recent claim that Britain's economy had turned a corner. The Tories pointed to figures that show there was growth in the months before April, but the Lib Dems say Rishi Sunak has utterly failed to deliver on his promises. Keir Starmer says Labour's new plan will renew the country. Now, a record number of people have lost faith in British politics, according to an electoral expert. Sir John Curtis says the analysis found trust and confidence in politics and the overall election system has never been lower. 45% of respondents almost never believe that governments of any party are fully focused on the challenges facing the country. And a record 58% said they almost never trust politicians of any party to tell the truth, a 19-point increase from 2020. Scotland's First Minister says there should be another referendum on Scottish independence within the next 5 years. Joining SNP candidate Joanna Cherry on the election trail in Edinburgh today, John Swinney denied suggestions he'd been downplaying the question in his campaign. He said the issue of independence relates to the main concerns of Scottish voters, including the cost of living. MSPs, meanwhile, have backed Scottish Government plans to release prisoners early to ease pressures on the system. Over 500 prisoners will be released in 4 waves, starting at the end of this month. Only inmates serving short sentences under 4 years who have 180 days or fewer to serve will be considered for release. The Justice Secretary, Angela Constance, announced the move last month following a spike in inmate numbers and concerns about the capacity of prisons. Ms Constance was also clear that the emergency release is one part of a plan that requires long-term thinking. A man has been arrested as part of the National Crime Agency investigation into PPE MedPro, the company led by Doug Barrowman, husband of Baroness Michelle Mone. The NCA opened the investigation into the company in 2021 into suspected criminal offences committed in the procurement of personal protective equipment, or PPE. The company was awarded the government contracts worth more than £200 million after Baroness Mone recommended the firm to ministers during the COVID pandemic. Baroness Mone and Mr Barrowman denied any wrongdoing. That's the news. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts, scan the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Thanks, Polly. Well, it's been another fun-packed day on the campaign trail for the Prime Minister. He's given an interview to Paul Brand on ITV, and don't forget, this was the interview that he left Normandy early to come back for and pre-record last Thursday. And Paul Brand's asked him some interesting questions about his fairly privileged background. Let's have a listen.
When you are wealthier than the king, what do you do day to day to make sure you're still in touch with the kind of struggles ordinary people face? Have you ever gone without something?
Yeah, I mean, my family emigrated here with very little, and that's how I was raised. I was raised with the values of hard work.
What did you go without as a child?
We went out with lots of things, right? Because my parents wanted to put everything into our education, and that was a priority.
So what sort of things had to be sacrificed?
Lots of things, right? So,
Can you give me an example
All
of something?
sorts of things. So, like lots of people, there'll be all sorts of things that I would have wanted as a kid that I couldn't have, right? Famously, Sky TV.
Okay.
So that was something that we never had growing up, actually. But it was lots of things. But again, that's my experience is obviously going to be what my experience was, what is more important in my values and how I was raised. And I was raised in a household where hard work was really important. You had to work very hard, and family was important, service to your community was important.
It's hard to know what to say, isn't it? I mean, it's a great question, and you can see him stalling there thinking, oh, my goodness, what was I deprived of? And, of course, inevitably now there are lots of memes going around social media. I think Oliver has been depicted with a bowl saying, please, sir, can I have some more Sky TV? Anyway, look, it is difficult for the Prime Minister because, of course, I think the Sunday Times Rich List revealed that he's actually wealthier than the King these days. So tonight, the simple question I'm asking you is Rishi Sunak out of touch? I mean, you might think, actually, being privileged is no bar to being Prime Minister. We like people to be leading the country who are well-educated and well brought up. But on the other hand, you might think that the whole I missed out on Sky TV as a child may suggest a bit of a disconnect with the general public. To get in touch, please leave a comment for me at gbnews.com/your say with your views this evening on that question, and we will, of course, revisit that a little later. Now, something else is exciting is happening for the Prime Minister because he's going to be doing another TV debate, a head-to-head against Keir Starmer. Let's cross live now to GB News' political correspondent, Catherine Forster, who's in Grimsby, ahead of tonight's televised extravaganza. Catherine.
Good evening, Camilla, and welcome to the Spin Room here in Grimsby Town Hall. This live leaders event's going to start in just about 25 minutes, a one-to-one interview, first with Sir Keir Starmer and then with the Prime Minister, then a 25-minute audience question and answer session. I think it's worth reflecting on why we're here in Grimsby particularly. This is a key battleground seat. There's been some constituency changes, but it's a red wall seat where voters lent their votes to the Conservative Party back in 2019 on the promise of levelling up and getting Brexit done. It's a heavily Leave voting seat. So that's Grimsby. Let's talk now to Shadow Paymaster General Jonathan Ashworth. Jonathan, thanks for talking to us on GB News this evening. Another big moment for these two, one of whom is going to be Prime Minister. What do you want to see from Sir Keir Starmer tonight? Because some thought that he was a bit flat-footed in that debate last week.
Well, I think what you'll see tonight is the clear choice in this general election. Keir will talk about how he has changed the Labour Party and how he now wants to change the country with his steps to rebuild this country, his steps to deliver 40,000 more appointments a week in our National Health Service, his plan to cut energy bills for good, his plan to crack down on crime and bring order to our borders. And in contrast, I think you'll see yet another desperate performance from Rishi Sunak. Yesterday, he delivered this long, desperate wish list, the most expensive panic in political history. A whole load of promises he cannot fund, from savings he cannot find. The money is not there. And in the end, with Rishi Sunak, you'll get 5 more years of chaos, and people will be paying more on their mortgages, £4,800 more on their mortgage as a result of Rishi Sunak's chaos.
I should say that figure is heavily disputed. You're making all sorts of assumptions about £71 billion of extra spending. You gave the Conservatives a very hard time over the £2,000 tax claim last week, but you're spinning these figures to suit yourself too, aren't you?
Well, let me be clear. First on tax, Labour will not increase income tax, not increase VAT, will not increase national insurance and not increase corporation tax. In contrast, Rishi Sunak has given us, he splurged out in this scattergun way, all these commitments after commitments that he cannot fund because the money is not there. And we totted it up. We went through his manifesto yesterday, billions of pounds worth of commitments. He can only fund that by going on another Liz Truss-style borrowing bonanza that will push up mortgages by £4,800. Rishi Sunak lied about the Labour position in the last debate because he said it had been put together by impartial civil servants. That was blown to smithereens the next day when those same civil servants came out and said he cannot characterise it in that way. So tonight you'll see the big choice between Labour's plan for the future and more desperation and chaos with Rishi Sunak.
Sir Keir Starmer yesterday compared the Conservatives' plans to Jeremy Corbyn-style manifesto, but Sir Keir Starmer campaigned twice for Jeremy Corbyn to become Prime Minister. He supported that manifesto. There's a problem with trust, isn't there, with Starmer?
Well, no, because that manifesto was roundly rejected by the British public. We got our worst defeat since the mid-1930s. We've learnt from that. We listened to the British public. Keir Starmer changed the Labour Party, he showed strong leadership, he's changed the Labour Party, and now he'll change the country. And it's Rishi Sunak is making commitment after commitment after commitments with no idea how he'll pay for it. I mean, so much has come out from Rishi Sunak's manifesto. I'm half expecting it to be a cuddly toy next, like the Generation Game. The reality is, though, if Rishi Sunak gets back in, it'll be more chaos and £4,800 more on your mortgage.
Jonathan Ashworth, thank you very much for speaking to us here on GB News. Well, a little bit earlier, I spoke to Treasury Minister Gareth Davies. He took a rather different view of events. Let's have a look at what he had to say. Treasury Minister Gareth Davies, thanks so much for talking to us on GB News this evening. You've got a massive mountain to climb in this general election. You're halfway through, the polls are not shifting. What do you want to see and hear from the Prime Minister this evening?
Well, look, the first thing to say is that tonight is an opportunity for the Prime Minister to continue to reiterate that the British public have a clear choice on the 4th of July, which is polling day, the only poll that matters, by the way, and that is a Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, leader of a party that will cut your taxes, will cut national insurance contributions, will cut and abolish some taxes. He will bring down the cost of living by bearing down on inflation and continuing to grow our economy, or a leader of the Labour Party who clearly will have to put up taxes by a significant amount because he has so many unfunded commitments. And so the clear strategy tonight is to emphasise the difference between Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer, and I'm pretty sure and confident that over the next few weeks the British public will be asking what on earth would Keir Starmer and Labour do in power. If you don't know what they're going to do, don't vote for it.
But the problem is you've been in power for 14 years. Taxes are at a 70-year high. Even though you're cutting national insurance, the tax burden in the next 5 years still projected to go up. So Labour, you say, are going to put up taxes, but you're doing that yourself still.
So the tax burden has had to rise because we've been through a once-in-a-century pandemic that cost us £400 billion, and then we went straight out of COVID into a war in Ukraine where we effectively had to step in and pay 50% of people's energy bills, which cost us $100 billion. So we've got very high levels of debt, and we believe as Conservatives in paying down our debt. So we have had to make some very difficult decisions, but we're now in a position where the economy is turning a corner. Inflation is down from 11 to 2%. That's enabling us to start to cut taxes. We've started with people in work. So we started by cutting twice national insurance contributions, saving £900 in the average earner's pay packet. We want to continue that in government, and we want to abolish national insurance contributions for the self-employed, some 4 million people in the next Parliament. So we accept that we've had to make difficult decisions on tax, but we are turning a corner, and we're going to reduce our tax burden, and we're going to reduce our tax burden specifically on those in work, because work should always pay, and we want to really incentivise people to stay in employment, to go into employment, because that's ultimately what will grow our economy.
You've already cut 4p off national insurance. You've made a lot of announcements in the manifesto, a lot of pledges. Why are the polls not shifting? Have people just stopped listening to what the Conservatives are saying?
No, I think people are increasingly aware of the stark choice that they will have in front of them on the 4th of July. A Prime Minister, as I say, who has a plan, who you know what he's going to do. You may disagree with us cutting national insurance contributions, but at least you know what he's going to do. You know we've got a Prime Minister who's going to stand by our military by increasing our defence spending up to 2.5%. That's a commitment that he's made that's not matched by Labour. You know that you've got a Prime Minister and a leader of the Conservative Party who has the values to take our country forward for the future. And I just feel like that will become very apparent tonight, but in the next few weeks.
And just finally, the messaging seems to have shifted a bit because you're now talking about the warnings of a Labour supermajority. Isn't this an admission that you know you're not going to win this election?
We are in this to win, and we're fighting for every single vote. There's still a long way to go. But what I will say is, I don't think we should be writing Keir Starmer a blank cheque. What we're saying is, if you don't know what you're voting for, if you don't know what Labour are going to do, don't vote for it. Don't hand Keir Starmer and the Labour Party a blank cheque to do whatever they want with your money. That will end up costing your family, it'll cost your business. It will just be a nightmare. We don't want 5 years of hard labour, and that's what we're setting out.
Gareth Davies, thanks so much for talking to us on GB News.
Right, let's delve into some of the latest data now with pollster Professor Matt Goodwin. Nice to see you tonight, Matt. Thanks for coming in. Where are we at then? What does your latest polling say?
Well, bad news for Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives. Labour on 39%, the Conservatives on 19%, the Reform Party just 2 points behind 17%, within the margin of error. So what we're seeing, I think here, Camilla, is real evidence that that inflection point, potentially, that point at which Reform begin to draw level or even potentially replace the Conservatives, is very much on the horizon.
I mean, if we look at that trajectory and we have that crossover point, that's what it's being called by political scientists and other wonks, could that happen as soon as next week?
Well, I think it could, and I think if it does happen, all bets are off. I think that will encourage Conservatives to defect. It will encourage donors to move behind Nigel Farage. It will give him new momentum. Don't forget there are about 10 to 13% of voters today in the country who say they don't know who they're going to vote for. How's that going to influence their vote choice? So there's a lot of known unknowns here. But the key point is a 20-point lead for the Labour Party. That is more than what they need for a majority. The Conservatives this week, across all polls, Camilla, averaged 21%.
21? Goodness.
This is historic territory. This is extinction-level event type territory.
Somebody was describing the D-Day debacle to me today as a sort of event horizon from which the Prime Minister will not be able to recover. Is that overstating it? Does your polling reflect a change in attitude since that happened?
Well, D-Day, the anniversary and how Rishi Sunak handled that, unquestionably a complete disaster for Rishi Sunak. So already we knew that 2/3 of voters, 2/3 of Conservatives said they thought Rishi Sunak leaving D-Day, the anniversary, early was quote-unquote unacceptable. In our polling, we find that about 1 in 5 voters are saying that has made them think more negatively about the Prime Minister. Now, obviously, a large number of those people already saying they already thought negatively about Rishi Sunak. And I think, this is an open goal for Nigel Farage, it's an open goal for the Reform Party, because what they're going to say is, does this guy actually believe in Britain? Does he believe in our history? Does he believe in our culture? Does he believe in who we are? And so, I'm puzzled as to what on earth is going on.
It could just be a competence concern, by the way, because obviously his entire shtick has been I work hard and I'm across the detail, and then it just looked bungling, and that's put people off.
I think it's partly maybe that, but also if you're going up against Nigel Farage and you're trying to win back those 2019 Conservatives who are more patriotic, why on earth would you put yourself in that position?
There's been another bungle tonight as well. I'm not sure if you've seen this, Matt, but Craig Williams, who's a Conservative candidate, has admitted to putting on a £100 bet on a July election just 3 days before it was announced. Now, that wouldn't be controversial, but previously this man was an aide to the Prime Minister and so will have been party to the inner thinking of Number 10.
Well, I mean, it's not a good look for Number 10 and the operation around Number 10. It's not a great thing at all. But more generally, step back. I mean, Rishi Sunak's leadership ratings this week, according to Redfield and Wilton, a reputable pollster, have crashed to -27. To put that in context, that's the lowest rating he has ever had as Prime Minister or Chancellor.
How does that relate to Boris Johnson and Liz Truss?
It makes Rishi Sunak more unpopular than both of those predecessors. Right. It also leaves him not far off what I would call Prince Andrew territory.
What?
Prince Andrew being -50, Rishi Sunak being close to -30. But here's the issue, right? I mean, look, Rishi Sunak's lost the country, right? He's not in the conversation anymore, let's be honest. The Conservative Party, they're not even competitive. The question now is, can they minimise losses? And who is going to replace Rishi Sunak after the election?
Yes.
Those are the questions that are going to bubble to the surface. For Nigel Farage and the Reform Party, big opportunity. They are winning over somewhere between 35 and 45% of 2019 Conservatives. Now, if that continues, and if that continues to inch upwards, Reform will overtake the Conservatives in the polling.
But top out somewhere? I mean, we can say that their poll rating might begin with a 2 rather than a 1. But how high could it get?
We don't know. In order to win a cluster of seats, it needs to go above 18, 19%. For Nigel Farage to win Clacton and maybe 5 million votes and 150 second places, maybe they walk away with 15, 16%. If Reform start going into 20, 21, 22%, I mean, all bets are off. I mean, they could really start causing some serious damage. We don't really know. What is clear, though, is on the current numbers today, across all polls, you're looking at a Labour majority of somewhere between 350, 400 seats, and you're looking at the Conservatives reduced to somewhere around 100, maybe even less than 100 seats.
Is 100 too generous? I was going to ask, because it's now looking, I see that Betfair are saying that the chances of the Conservatives losing more than 200 seats is now 83%. So is 100, is the Conservatives being left with three figures in seats now looking a bit optimistic? Because you were talking about near extinction level events here.
Well, there's a few things to keep in mind, right? We've got 13% of voters who are undecided. They're not sure how to vote. We've got that reform vote. Maybe when Conservatives go into the polling booth, maybe they're saying, actually, on balance, I don't want Keir Starmer to have a big majority, whatever. Maybe there's going to be, you know, a few last-minute, you know, things in the campaign we haven't taken account for. But what is clear is that the Conservatives, ideologically, philosophically, electorally, are as weak as they have ever been in modern history. And I'm not entirely sure who has the answer to that problem.
No. And what's interesting is there's now talk of a supermajority, not, by the way, among Labour supporters, but Grant Shapps, the Defence Secretary, has been mentioning today. We seem to have moved from we could win to we could result in a hung parliament to there could be a supermajority, please be warned. And yet it doesn't seem as if Keir Starmer has done much to merit this supermajority. It's just all a result of abject anger with the Conservatives.
It's interesting, isn't it? A lot of Conservative friends of mine have said to me in recent days, well, they've just given up. There's nobody there. I'm hearing rumours that CCHQ Conservative headquarters is half empty. I'm hearing rumours the Conservative Party has run out of money.
Yes.
There's a kind of a sense of the morale is collapsing around the Conservative Party. Look, if the Conservatives don't get this thing back on track, we're looking at a defeat worse than 1997. We're looking at the biggest defeat for the Conservative Party in the history of general elections. And if that were to happen, you know, all bets are off. I mean, reform could easily end up maybe replacing the Conservatives next week. And if they do, how's that going to change the dynamics of the general election? And after the general election, you know, whoever ends up inheriting this mess from Rishi Sunak, how are they going to fend off Rishi Sunak and reform and reconnect with those 2019 Boris Johnson voters? I mean, it's a nightmare for the Conservatives.
Do you know one thing that's certain in all this? I mean, among lots of unknowns, is that we will need you back in the studio to be analysing
Happy
data.
to be here.
If there's a crossover moment, you'll be here.
I will be here. Yeah.
All right, Matt Goodwin, thank you very much indeed. Talking about bets and placing bets, so Craig Williams is the man I just mentioned who put the £100 on the early July election, having been an advisor to the Prime Minister. He's standing for the Conservative Party and he's standing in Montgomeryshire. I just need to read out the other candidates for due fairness. Jeremy Brignall-Thorpe is standing for the Greens. Oliver Lewis is Reform's candidate. Glyn Preston is standing for the Lib Dems. Elwyn Vaughan is standing for Plaid Cymru. Craig Williams is the Conservative candidate, as I've said, and Steve Witherden is there for the Labour Party. Well, in just a moment, we're going to speak about the elderly and whether they need to be properly triaged in A&E and whether that will bring down waiting lists. We'll be speaking to an NHS expert in just a moment.
I'm Stephen Dixon, and thanks for joining us on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Britain's Newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
I've got a grade 3 astrocytoma brain tumour. Once I was diagnosed, I tried to do my claim with my insurance company and was rejected. They then also cancelled my life insurance and also cancelled my wife's policies as well.
And this is Zurich Insurance, John.
This is Zurich,
and their point was, because you'd had some dizzy spells, which you hadn't told them about, they say dizzy spells equates to brain tumour, which there's no evidence to support that.
I was with King's College Hospital. They ignored them. King's College Hospital were the experts.
And you were expecting £25,000?
Yeah, that was a critical illness claim.
Critical illness, because you've got a critical illness. Clearly, it couldn't be more critical, could it?
No.
Michelle, you've
You've got a lovely, poorly husband, and you're also worrying about paying the bills and what the future holds.
Yeah.
What impact is this having on you on a day-to-day basis?
I try not to think too much about the future because it does upset me. I'm kind of thinking, when John does go, I'm left with a mortgage to pay and 2 young children.
How old are your kids?
5 and 3.
Right.
Yeah. So it's incredibly tough.
And are you working?
I haven't worked since having the children.
Right.
And that's a decision we made when we had children.
In the grand scheme of things, this amount of money is a drop in the ocean for a company like Zurich.
Yes, because I think they could make all this go away.
I've read some of the statement. Zurich statement, we're sorry to hear of the very difficult circumstances Mr Rendler's family are experiencing. You're terminally ill, and they're calling that difficult circumstances.
The People's Channel.
I'm Mark Dolan, and this is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled.
Lovely. Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Vote 2024 with me, Camilla Tominey. I asked you before the break whether you thought Rishi Sunak was out of touch. Julie says, I'm no particular Sunak fan, but I think it's getting ridiculous. He could very well have been protecting his parents' feelings here. And if that's the case, fair play to him. Well, in reaction to him talking about not being able to afford Sky. Stuart says, Rishi's comment about not having a Sky dish when he was young and growing up is quite valid. These days, it seems that even those with limited budgets still seem to see Sky as a minimum requirement above many other actual necessities. And William says, journalists are so shallow, trying to embarrass Rishi Sunak because he's rich. I was raised on a council estate. I couldn't care less about his wealth. His values are what matter, and he is a good man who has worked hard on behalf of the country. That is what matters. Maureen says, we were lucky to have got a meal. We often couldn't afford a TV. Rishi is so out of touch. I think they're summarising the mixed feelings that people have about the Prime Minister. Let's talk about this idea of having MOTs for the over 65. So just to rattle through what's been suggested, it's the idea of, at the front door of an A&E department, speaking to elderly people, taking their blood pressure, checking their heart health, their mobility, malnutrition, and reviewing their kind of respiratory history in order to make sure that they get the help sooner, and so they don't end up in a hospital taking up a bed when they don't have to, when indeed they could be treated at home. So it's kind of a suggestion, a better form of triage. Let's speak to an expert about it. Dr. Iseult Roche, lovely Cornish name there, Iseult, is a director at healthcare at the think tank 2020 Health and a medical doctor in the NHS. What do you think about this? Because triage in general is a problem in the NHS. People ending up at the doctors who don't need to be there. They could have been at the pharmacist, and then people ending up at urgent care who could be at the doctors, and then people ending up at A&E who could be in urgent care.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. When it comes to people knowing where to go to access health information, it can sometimes not always be the right solution for everyone. But certainly I think where the MOTs for over 65s come in, I think in a way potentially protects people who are of an age and a disposition who might not think to put themselves first and might not think to always go out and actually seek that early help and early intervention. So in some ways, it could really be a blessing. I've worked in various hospitals, and in some hospitals they have been running similar schemes in regards to assessing frailty and supporting, best care in the community. And we have seen things really benefit patients. For the majority of people who are older within hospitals, obviously some people need to be in hospital for very significant reasons, but for the majority of people, if they can have good care at home, community care and potentially in their own home is ideal for them for many, many reasons.
There's a bit of a contradiction at play here, I think, because on one hand, we're used to having the elderly in hospitals and struggling to get out of hospitals because they haven't got a social care plan. On the other hand, I would associate the kind of people who say, I don't want to go to A&E, I don't want to be a burden, on the over 65s. Older people are really traditional. They see accident and emergency as exactly that. And I think frown upon people who turn up there for minor ailments. And yet it's those elderly people that may be overlooking their own very serious health concerns.
Absolutely, and I think this is one reason why it could potentially work. If you think about it, if somebody was to go in for a reason, say for example they were to have a cut that became infected or something like that, if they were just treated and then allowed to go home or as they would want to go home, then that might be sufficient for the vast majority of people. But there are some cases where frailty, remember frailty is quite a broad term.
Yes.
So frailty can be something that people actually mask within their social environments. So they might be struggling at home, but they won't tell their friends or family. They might not be eating properly, they might be losing weight, but they'll keep it to themselves because there's that sense of dignity and pride and wanting to make sure you retain your own identity. And unfortunately, for some people, there is a fear that frailty means loss of self-control and loss of identity. And I think it's really important that we work with communities and media and organisations in order to people who are reaching an older age. Let's face it, we have a hugely ageing society, and it's really important that people know that they can be well for long term, and actually if they are starting to get frail, the important thing is to seek help at an earlier time, so that can actually be restored and potentially turned around. So I think it's quite interesting. I mean, if you look at some of the statistics, so if you think about for example, I think something that's been reported is over 1 million people of 75 years or above are admitted to hospital each year, and about 20% of those are very frail. But imagine if those people who, when they were in their 60s, potentially had an opportunity to have a frailty assessment and then potentially advice or further screening or further channeling into appropriate services to actually improve their health and, most importantly, to keep them well and in their own environment. Perhaps subsequently, perhaps in 20 years' time, we won't be looking at over 1 million people over 75 with it's back
to basics, this, Doctor, isn't it, in terms of prevention rather than cure, making sure people don't need to end up in A&E in the first place. Dr. Roche, thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening.
You're welcome, thank you.
Coming up, I'm excited about this. As somebody who encounters a great many potholes around my local area, we're going to be joined next by Mr. Pothole himself, who's going to give his verdict on Labour's plans to flatten out our bumpy roads. Don't go anywhere, that's next.
Evening, time for your latest weather from the Met Office here on GB News. For many of us, it's been a fine day today. Tomorrow, a very different story. A cold start and then it'll turn wet, and particularly in the west, very windy. Here's the reason why. A couple of sets of weather fronts coming in from the Atlantic. Ahead of that, we've had a ridge of high pressure, which, as I said, has brought most of us a fine day. Still 1 or 2 showers over northeast Scotland and eastern England, but they are fading away, and generally it's going to be a dry night with some lengthy clear spells, and that's why it's going to turn chilly. Temperatures well down into single digits, even in towns and cities, and some rural spots even lower. So yes, another pretty fresh start tomorrow. Generally a dry and a bright start, but not everywhere. Here comes the rain trickling in towards Northern Ireland and West Wales, along with southwest England. So rapidly clouding over in the southwest through the morning. Much of the Midlands and eastern England will start to dry, and with a bit of sunshine, temperatures will soon start to lift. But turning wet across Northern Ireland, it's going to be a soggy day here, increasingly windy too. Most of Scotland will start dry. Again, though, a cold start here. And then steadily as we go through the day, the cloud and the rain across Northern Ireland will start to spread its way into southwest Scotland up towards the central belt. The rain drifting into Wales and southwest England by lunchtime, and then through the afternoon, some of that rain getting into northern England and the Midlands. Much of eastern England will stay dry through most of the day, along with northern Scotland. But in the west, not only turning wet, but also windy. Unusually windy around these western coasts through the afternoon. Again, feeling pretty cool, particularly with the wet and the windy weather that's moved across northern Scotland for Friday, where it may well linger. Elsewhere on Friday, it's a blustery, gusty day with, yes, some decent spells of sunshine, but a whole raft of showers. So very changeable through Friday. 1 minute it's dry, the next minute you've got a downpour, and that showery picture continuing into the weekend and staying on the cool side.
GB News is Britain's election channel.
And when the big stories break, we're tackling them on Britain's newsroom. When we disagree, and we disagree a lot, it's even livelier than normal.
We don't disagree that much.
We do. His comedy, though, is revolting. I knew her, and unlike you. That explains Beverly Turner's temperament.
It's a bit frosty in here, isn't it?
He'll have one of me one day.
For dartball practice. Britain's newsroom on GB News. Weekdays, 9:30 a.m.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Let's talk about potholes, because there's nothing more important to talk about during this election campaign. Now, don't worry, because Labour, if they do form the next government, have pledged to fix 1 million potholes a year in England. The party has said it will give multi-year funding settlements to local leaders to fix broken roads, seeking to end what it called a sticking plaster approach to repairs. The Conservative Party predictably said it would take no lectures on backing drivers, adding that Labour had declared war on motorists across Britain in reference to the party's support of ULEZ and LTNs and all the rest of it. Well, let's speak to an expert on potholes, and we couldn't find a better expert than Mr. Pothole himself, the pothole campaigner, Mark Morell, who has told me before the show that he's a huge fan of GB News and everything it stands for. Mark, what's the problem here? What's gone wrong with Britain's roads? Because I know anyone listening to this and watching it, like me, will be familiar with the fact that our roads seem to be crumbling, and the stuff they use to repair potholes these days, it doesn't work. It comes out really easily. They're not properly filled in, are they?
No, you're right. And yeah, there's a multi-billion, well, 16.3 billion pound backlog in road maintenance in England and Wales. That's the bit between curb to curb. There's a 6 billion pound backlog in bridge maintenance. Then you've got footpaths. I estimate there's a total road maintenance backlog of about 30 billion pounds. To be honest, as I tweeted earlier, I think the two main parties, it's a joke and an insult to road users, what they're suggesting. If you look at the size of the actual task, it's actually costing, according to an economic survey, a study, that £14.4 billion a year through badly maintained roads. We need to invest. The two main parties just paying gains, smoke and mirrors. I mean, if you look at Rishi's one of 8.3 billion over 10 years, enough to resurface 5,000 miles of road. That's only enough to do Essex. 20% of our roads need resurfacing now. We need to do things differently, radically. I mean, in Labour, I was expecting better things from Labour because I did some work with Lillian Greenwood when she was the chair of Transport Select Committee, who had a really good insight to things. And I'm afraid it's a very poor response, a pathetic pothole pledge from Labour, I'm afraid.
I'm loving that alliteration, Mark. I mean, Labour is saying they'll fill 1 million a year. Do you know how many potholes there are in England at the moment? I've no idea, admittedly.
Right. I've been doing some work with a company that's come up with an app called Stan the App. You can download the public, do it for free. You can put it in your car and monitor the state of the roads. It produces a real accurate map, and it's data harvesting from the public. It doesn't report direct to councils as of yet, but I think it frightens the life out of the councils. Based upon what they're showing, and I can't say too much because they're working with a national newspaper on the story at the moment, there are millions, far more than anybody'd like to admit, because councils have changed their intervention criteria to try and fit their money. Well, in fact, it's a far worse situation. And you'll know that as a road user, you know. Yeah.
But sometimes they fix half of the potholes on one road, but not the other half. And then we notice that the work gets done before the year end because there's some pot of money left, presumably. But to be fair, I mean, we can be flippant about it, but unfilled potholes cost lives. I mean, they cost my tyres on my Mini Cooper, but more importantly, they're an absolute... I mean, they're a death trap for cyclists, aren't they?
Yeah, one cyclist a week is killed or seriously injured as a result of potholes. Over 70 motorcyclists are killed or seriously injured as a result of badly maintained roads. There's a human cost, there's the economic cost. And I cannot understand why government will not work out a proper economic model that says by investing more, change the way we do things, have a proper road tax, and it's used like other countries just purely for that. Osborne tried that a while ago, and to go to what is national highways now, and because the Treasury quietly kicked it into the long grass. That's never happened. And I also think we should charge a levy to the petrol and oil companies at the pump so that they actually fund our roads, because it's in their interest to us to use their commodity. I think there is some really good ways. I keep hearing about it's costed. I mean, there is some ideas that I could come up with that would cost it and actually would take the pain away and save money. I've been working on a paper called Curing Pothole Britain that gives a real insight to it. But guess what? The authorities don't want to know about it.
No, Mark Morrell, you need to stand for office, mate. Mr. Pothole, we'll all be voting for you. But on a serious note, thank you on behalf of all motorists and all cyclists and all bus drivers and any other vehicles, because your campaigning is much appreciated. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening.
You're welcome. I can't stand for office. I want to get things done. It doesn't work like that.
Very good point. People say to me, why don't you stand for office? I say, I think the country's suffered enough, to be perfectly honest. Now, on to the next story. Can you believe it? We love this can you believe it moment. And tonight, I think we've decided to select Andrea Jenkyns, the former minister and Conservative MP. Can you believe it? She's produced her election literature, the leaflets that she wants to put through the door. If you're watching this on telly, you might notice there's an omission. And if you're listening on the radio, let me tell you what the omission is. On this leaflet, there is no mention of the following words: Rishi Sunak, the Conservatives. In fact, the only photograph that she's put on of her and a politician is Andrea Jenkyns with, you guessed it, Nigel Farage. So I think that says quite a lot about the Conservative candidate for Leeds South West and Morley. Because I've mentioned that constituency, I, of course, have to mention the other candidates in the interest of balance. So for the Greens, we've got Chris Bell, we've got Howard Graham for the Liberal Democrats, I believe, and, oh no, Michael Fox for the, sorry, let's get through this again. The Greens, Chris Bell. The Yorkshire Party is Howard Graham, and the Liberal Democrats have got Michael Fox. Reform's got James Kendall. The SDP's got Nigel Perry. And Labour's got Mark Sewards. And you can find all of them on the website, gbnews.com. The other thing I'm going to say is, can you believe it? I've been shortlisted for an award. Some of you will already know about this. This is a Trick Award, and I was initially nominated for my interview with the broadcasting legend that is Alistair Stewart, who revealed to me his heartbreaking diagnosis that he had dementia. I sat with him and spoke about that at length, and I spoke to his wife, Sal, at their home. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I was, first of all, nominated, and then the public, including your very good selves, voted, and it's now the case that I've been shortlisted down to 4, so I hope to win on June the 25th. But it's not just me at GB News who's celebrating, because Nigel Farage and Eamon Holmes have also been nominated, and Best News Programme may well go to GB News Breakfast, because they're also in that category. So we've all done very well, and we're patting ourselves on the back. Can you believe it? Coming up next, we're going to be talking about whether workplaces should ban socialising at the pub because it might alienate Muslim colleagues. Can you believe it? We could use that phrase for this story too. But stay tuned, because I'll be speaking to both a Muslim and somebody who runs a pub. Stay tuned.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get the book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Today, we've got a veteran who endeavours to help those suffering from anxiety in all its various forms and manifestations.
Yes, over 3 decades, Simon Lee has established himself as a pioneer, seeking new ways to coach personal development and mental strength.
Now, look, there's this famous phrase, isn't it, that hard times create weak men and weak men create hard times. Is that the kind of philosophy that your work is based on?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because as a child, I received a masterclass in how weak men create hard times.
Did you go through hard times as a kid?
We had 3 toxic men in the family, and they caused the family no end of grief, trauma and hardship. So, and at the time when you're going through it, you think, well, you can't help but fall into a victim mentality. You think, why me? Why am I going through this? But actually, I couldn't do what I do now without that masterclass.
Do you mind me asking who those men were?
Yep, it's fine. One of them was my stepfather.
Yeah.
One of them was my grandfather, and one of them was my uncle.
Right.
So they're all inner family members. And without exception, all of them, outside of the family doors, wanted to put themselves across as moral pillars of society.
How do you turn that story around and be the man that you are today and turn what you went through into a positive? How do you do that?
You've established that pretty much you can, choose to be a victim of your circumstance or use it as inspiration to do better and say, you know what, when I'm older, for example, if you had a bad childhood, I want to make sure my kids get the kind of childhood I didn't have. So how do you relay that to the people you mentor now, I guess?
What we do, I set up something called Unlimited Courage. We talk about giving men a primary aim of courage. So we bring in philosophies such as Stoicism, our own 7 Courages, Bushido, and they love it. They love it. And I must admit, when I found it, I felt like I'd found the Holy Grail.
Wow.
The People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And why it matters to you. From your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you. Good afternoon, Britain. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Vote 2024 with me, Camilla Tominey. Let's get stuck into this quite extraordinary story. City law firms have been urged to stop hosting work socials at the pub over fears they exclude Muslim staff. A report by Rare, a UK graduate recruitment company specialising in diversity, has said the legal profession's big drinking culture is unfair to those who abstain from alcohol. It suggested that law firms introduce more cooking, painting and pottery classes to boost team bonding rather than hosting events centred on booze. One Muslim interviewee said she had been put under huge pressure to drink. Another said it was religiously dishonourable to be seen in a pub. Let's bring Hugh Osmond into the conversation. He's the founder of Punch Taverns. What do you think of this, Hugh? I mean, pubs have had a hard time since COVID. I don't know if you need another reason for people not to socialise in them.
No, I think that's exactly the point. I mean, pubs are pretty fundamental to British culture, British heritage, British history. Even if you look in guides like Lonely Planet, they say the thing to do, visit the pub. And they are, they've been the hub of most communities where people socialise for hundreds of years. And fundamentally, if people want to come and live here, which they have and they always have, then they have to accept that pubs are a major part of lives, and it's the place where people to go out and socialise and all the rest of it. It's not as narrow, and it shouldn't be as narrow as drinking alcohol. I mean, I would say in defence that if there are still pubs in 2024 that don't cater for people that do not just want to drink pints of beer or alcohol, then they shouldn't be in business either. It's not a question of forcing everyone to drink. Pubs do cater for non-drinkers now. There's really good ranges of soft drinks and non-alcoholic beers and all kinds of other things. Pubs are for socialising. It's not just about...
I mean, Hugh, I'm a teetotal, so I'm quite happy to go to the pub and have an appetiser or whatever, or a non-alcoholic beer, and it's fine. I mean, also the other thing is, pubs are pretty diverse places, aren't they? I mean, I don't think you check people's religion at the door, let's be honest, but I mean, aren't they accommodating of people of all creeds, colours, religions and all the rest of it?
Yes, I don't think you get much more diverse than pubs because they cater for every different type of community. I think not every pub I've ever been into has been very diverse, but pubs as a whole are incredibly diverse. They cater, there are pubs in every community around the country. Every village has at least one pub. Every town has 100 pubs. You can pick the pub that you want to go to. But I think, the important point is surely that people who come to this country because they want to live and work here, and you can understand that because fundamentally this is a good country with good values. they do need to. It doesn't mean we shouldn't cater or be tolerant of their views, but they
Hugh,
need to embrace.
I'll stop you there.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop you there, Hugh, just because we're running out of time, and I've got Haz Ahmed in the studio, who's a political commentator and a Muslim. And I wouldn't normally categorise you like that. I'm a political commentator and a Catholic, lapsed, Haz. But basically, I want to ask you this. I mean, is a pub a no-go zone for a Muslim?
We've had these no-go zones about Muslim areas and pubs. Come on, I mean, the idea that Muslims don't... I mean, I'm literally coming back from work, drinks. I don't drink myself. I just had lemon and lime and literally told my friends at work social, leaving drinks, that I'm, coming over here. And that's totally fine. They're not really a no-go area for Muslims. I just think this notion that portrays that Muslims don't go to pubs. I just think there's also, a lot of non-Muslims who don't go to pubs as well for reasons that are for health reasons, for personal reasons. Lots of the time, people who are recovering from alcohol tend not to go because it sort of gives them PTSD or something like that.
Sure.
So,
but what about this? I mean, one Muslim interviewee said she had been put under huge pressure to drink. Do you get that? I mean, I understand that from a teetotal. Come on, have a drink. And I'm like, no, I don't. And I can have a perfectly decent night just on lemonade. Do you have that sometimes or not?
I literally, when I read the article, because I interned at a law firm not long ago, and yes, there is this element of there's a drinking culture, but I do believe that we in modern Britain today have become very accepting of the fact that others don't drink, and we are, tolerant, and if they don't want to drink, that's totally fine. So I do sort of question the narrative of the article, because it really portrays Muslims as sort of people who don't drink. It's not just Muslims. There's lots of people who don't drink.
But how about this idea? Another interviewee who was a Muslim said he felt it was religiously dishonourable to be seen in a pub. Is that right? Muslims don't socialise. I've
literally just said to you, I'm coming back from a social event where it was a leavers drinks, and I'm coming back from a friend's drinks. So I don't know this individual. I don't know what the comments are going, but I think it's absolutely unfair to say that Muslims don't go to these places to socialise and stuff. As you said earlier, pubs can be a great place to socialise. They can be a great place to watch Euros, for example.
Well,
I look forward to going there.
They're coming up soon. Also, I don't quite understand why Muslims have been singled out. You could say, we can't have too many gatherings at a pub because it might alienate pregnant people. We can't have too many gatherings at a pub because it might alienate people who are on antibiotics.
Exactly.
What's happening here?
Next thing it is, we're going to blame Muslims for the number of pubs that are closing down. I also... I also think that we have to look at what Amy LeMay is doing to London, making London, at 11 p.m. it shuts down. So where's the people that want to go and drink? And I'm totally more for having more pubs, but I just think that it shouldn't be a singled out Muslim issue.
Should we go for a drink after this?
Absolutely.
OK, great.
A normal drink.
Thank you so much. Tom Harwood can't go for a drink because he's hosting State of the Nation.
Yeah.
30 seconds, Tom, or less.
Clearly I'll be going for a drink after State of the Nation. But no, big show today, of course, growth.
Yes.
0% in April. We're going to be diving into why that was. What could we do to get the economy growing faster? But also, we're going to be speaking to a millionaire who wants to pay more tax.
I love these people who want to pay more tax. Pay it already. You don't need to wait for a Labour government. First, here's the weather with Alex Deakin.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Evening, time for your latest weather from the Met Office here on GB News. For many of us, it's been a fine day today. Tomorrow, a very different story. Cold start and then it'll turn wet, and particularly in the west, very windy. Here's the reason why. A couple of sets of weather fronts coming in from the Atlantic. Ahead of that, we've had a ridge of high pressure, which, as I said, has brought most of us a fine day. Still one or two showers over northeast Scotland and eastern England, but they are fading away, and generally it's going to be a dry night with some lengthy clear spells, and that's why it's going to turn chilly. Temperatures well down into single digits, even in towns and cities, and some rural spots even lower. So yes, another pretty fresh start tomorrow. Generally a dry and a bright start, but not everywhere. Here comes the rain trickling in towards Northern Ireland and West Wales, along with southwest England. So rapidly clouding over in the southwest through the morning. Much of the Midlands and eastern England will start dry, and with a bit of sunshine, temperatures will soon start to lift. But turning wet across Northern Ireland, it's going to be a soggy day here, and increasingly windy too. Most of Scotland will start dry. Again, though, a cold start here. And then steadily as we go through the day, the cloud and the rain across Northern Ireland will start to spread its way into southwest Scotland up towards the central belt. The rain drifting into Wales and southwest England by lunchtime, and then through the afternoon, some of that rain getting into northern England and the Midlands. Much of eastern England will stay dry through most of the day, along with northern Scotland. But in the west, not only turning wet, but also windy. Unusually windy around these western coasts through the afternoon. Again, feeling pretty cool, particularly with the wet and the windy weather that's moved across northern Scotland for Friday, where it may well linger. Elsewhere on Friday, it's a blustery, gusty day with, yes, some decent spells of sunshine, but a whole raft of showers. So very changeable through Friday. 1 minute it's dry, the next minute you've got a downpour, and that showery picture continuing into the weekend and staying on the cool side.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's our summer spectacular. 3 top prizes that have to be won. There's cash. £15,000 in tax-free cash to spend on anything you like this summer. Plus a brand new iPhone 15 with a set of Apple AirPods. And if that wasn't enough, we'll also treat you to some fun in the sun with £500 to spend at your favourite UK attraction this summer. For another chance to win the iPhone, treats and £15,000 cash, text prize to 63232. Text costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB06 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 28th of June. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching